Awesome. What an introduction.
I've heard tale of this multiple times now. While we were setting up, even I got my own little private podcast V2 going nuts about Rainer. But Adam, for folks that may not be as familiar with you, like what does it mean to be a balance designer? What exactly is it that you do on the Heroes team?
Oh gosh, there's a lot that goes into it. How do I put it? Basically, think of like you're in charge of the whole game and you kind of have little bits and pieces of input and feedback everywhere, and then specific spots that you're really responsible for. So me specifically, I do all of the balance patches basically that you've seen over the last year. Pretty much almost all of those were designed by me. They run by the rest of the designers of like to make sure I'm not doing anything too crazy, which I've pushed the envelope a few times on, but most of that is me. We also handle the balance of new heroes before they come into the game, and we also design and handle the reworks too.
All right, so yeah, I was thinking in my head, I'm like, balance designer, oh, it probably does balance, and that's probably too broad a spectrum, but never mind. That's apparently exactly what you do is all the balance.
Yeah, pretty much. I have like some input on other parts because we kind of cross-reference things sometimes. Like I have some input on, I talk with matchmaking guys, because I play a lot. And so when I run into weird stuff, I'll talk to them and try and fix things. But it's a very broad spectrum. Nexus anomalies is another one where, we have a lot of input.
Yeah, excited to talk about that because it's maybe a month away. I don't know. We'll get to that later.
I mean,
yeah. So when I have this image in my head, which is probably too fantastical, but I'm a dungeon master. I picture you with just piles of paper from home, weird maps like you're, solving crimes with red yarn tied round, Rainer ? Written up there. Like, okay. What does the process look like? Do you wake up in the middle of the night in a sweat knowing you need to change Asmodan? How do you make these decisions?
There's a lot that goes into it. Yes, I have woken up in the middle of the night and thought, wait, what about that hero change or what about that bug? How are we going to fix it? That has happened. But as far as like the normal process, it's a mix a lot of both looking at a lot of data and then looking at the community feedback and then intuition on my own experience when I play. I think that all three of those are actually really important. You've talked before a couple weeks ago about when I went onto the forums and talked about how we look at data. So that's definitely one piece of the equation. I look at a lot of the high-end stuff, like, 1+ MMR in Storm League, for example. And then I usually, as far as data is concerned, look at the rest of the game to cross-reference that I'm not really messing up some other part of the game. Because one thing that's kind of interesting as a designer is that a lot of people actually play like almost completely different games depending on your skill level in your league and things like that, and whether you're really casual or really hardcore. And so a lot of it is trying to, fix the problems in the specific area that you see one for, but then also making sure that the whole game is okay, right? That it's okay for the majority of the player base. And a lot of what we do, you have to consider everybody, which is something that when we receive feedback, it's oftentimes from a very specific pocket of player base. Like, this feedback about, high-level Samuro players, for example, is very different than Kel'Thas in middle and low leagues, is different from Lili in middle leagues, for example, right? Those are all very different places that people have vastly different experiences.
So I'm assuming that's where, at least to a certain degree, that's where data comes in and helps, because otherwise, like, where do you start trying to compartmentalize that many suggestions and requests from so many different corners of the player base at all different skill levels, right? Like, I'm sure somebody on Reddit is like, oh, clearly it's just your own personal bias and that's how you do your job. But I'm sure that's not actually the case. Like, how do you kind of take all of that into account and move forward with changes?
So usually, like, for example, I'll take you through my thought process on going through your typical balance patch, right? So I know balance patches come in a few weeks. This is how I think. First thing I do is I go and look at data. I look at, Storm League. I look at the overall win rates of everything in the game. And I kind of look at outliers. And those are the first heroes. I kind of like make a list on the side of these are the heroes I want to touch, right? And I'll look at that list and be like, okay, Mal'Ganis is a little high. These heroes are a little low. These play rates are low. Another data-driven thing I look at is hero pick and ban rates, both at high level and low level, and I'll look for outliers there. Because while they may not be necessarily win rate problems, they're what the community thinks is over or underpowered, right? So I look at those and I get a list of a few heroes that I definitely want to touch, right? And then after that, I go and I have my own separate list of when I've been going, like every day when I come into to work, I look at Reddit, I look at forums, I look at different community places of feedback, and I play a game every morning, actually, is the first thing that I do. And while I'm doing those things, I make little notes of like, oh, this talent doesn't feel like it's in the right place, or, oh, hey, this hero's got some feedback that I agree with that we can make a change. And so I've got a little list even before a balance patch comes of these are some things that I want to work on anyways. So I go to that list, I go to the high-low heroes from data, and that's where I kind of start making changes. And then after that, I usually, and this is kind of like my own little spice and flavor to every balance patch, is I have a goal of there's always going to be like 1 to 2, maybe 3 changes that are just like really wild and crazy and going to get the players really excited about that change. And so even though all these other changes are like, the boring, this is too win rate, 2% too high, and this is too low, I want to make sure that every balance patch has something that's really exciting, that's really cool, that you're going to get excited to play. And, some of those examples are when I mess with level 20 talents, like Uther can Divine Shield multiple targets, Ari will Resurrect. These types of things are like, these are things that really haven't worked for a long time, and I want to add a really cool thing that people will be motivated to play that hero for.
The one that jumps to my mind is Kel'Thuzad, when you went about changing that reset build.
Yes, that reset, that was one of those, right? Like every balance patch, there's something that crazy that I want people to get excited about. And whether or not it works is one thing. Usually, actually, this year, things have worked much more often than I thought they would, to be perfectly honest. But to me, and this is one of the things we'll probably talk about later, it's very important philosophically to try and push the boundaries and try and find these crazy things that are really fun.
Did those start to pile up? Like, do you have an idea of, like, as those ideas come for what would be like big highlight balance changes? Like, is there ever a point where you're like, all right, we can't cram all of those into one patch? Do you have like a short stack somewhere of like all the crazy things you want to do with different talents?
Yes, I do. And that's kind of part of that list I told you I referenced. These are like future dream balance patch things. Some of them are crazier than others. One that's been on there for about 9 or 12 months is adding a level 20 Zagara talent that summons like 3 drop pods and then does Bloodlust on everything. My idea is Broodlust. But
oh my God. What are you doing here?
The reaction right there. That's what I'm going for.
Go right now. I give you permission to leave this podcast. Make that happen.
I really want to, but I made Corrosive Saliva at 16, and that almost every balance pack is like, oh, I don't know. Maybe next time I come back to it, it's like, oh, there it is again. I don't know. It's still there, but I don't know.
I should not have had that caffeine before the show. I'm gonna like shake out of my skin right now. I'm so excited by that suggestion.
I really want Broodlust. That's my pocket thing, but I don't know if it'll happen. We'll see.
No, it's a great name. It's a great name, man. You should roll with it. But I mean, first of all, I guess just to pause to say thank you, because you do. It sounds like you're championing the constant evolution of this game, and we really appreciate it, because certainly one of the most exciting things we get to see. I mean, I love trying to identify what your like project of the month was. It seemed like in this last balance patch it was updating regen, which I gotta say, like, oh my, it got me playing Malfurion. Just knowing that I'm being healed for a number means the world to me. Have we ever been just wrong on this show? And you're listening to the show and you're like, no guys, wrong direction, like back it up.
Actually, not too often. A big part of the reason why I actually chose you guys specifically to go on is because how do I put this? You do have criticism and you do think about things a lot and make assumptions on what we think, but it's always with a lot of thought behind it, and it's usually very constructive. And that makes it, you're like wrong a lot less often, I guess, right? Like, even though you might not be right in like, oh, I thought that they were thinking of this and our actual reasoning was this, your thought process still is there. And it's like, oh, I can see where they thought that. And a lot of players probably think that way. So that helps me with like dev comments and future patches and stuff. So it doesn't really happen too often. Have been times where you guys have mentioned something I'm like, I did think of that and I don't really agree. And sometimes I change my mind later, like that Arthas death coil change.
Yes.
When I watched it, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, I get what they're saying, but like my thought process when I took it out was actually, and this is kind of a designery pet peeve thing, but we don't really like when we put too many mechanics on one thing. And we think of that as like over designing something, that if your design really works, it should work in a simple way. So I should say I'm less of a fan of talents that have like 4 different things going on. It's like this bonus and this bonus with this requirement here. And removing that extra range was to try and keep the talent simple so that you can really understand what it's pointed towards. And you guys are like, oh, I missed it. I got those long range Genji snipes. I'm like, does that really happen that often? But the more I thought about it, and this is a different philosophy that I also have with balanced patches to design in general, is that it's a lot more risky to take fun away than to add something or add fun to something. And that's something that I've made a couple mistakes on throughout the year, but I'm getting a lot better at, is really being cognizant of that when we're making changes. Because no matter almost what change you make, someone is going to love the way that things used to be, right? And we're never going to get completely away from that. But my goal is to always add fun and add good feelings when you see these changes, and you can see why we did it, and you can see an opportunity of how we can use that.
That's a good philosophy to have. I mean, I think that's true of like no matter what you're doing as a profession, right? It's probably like you're not going to make everyone happy. There's going to be folks that always feel like maybe they got left behind, or sure, or are hesitant to change in the first place. But that's really cool, and I think you've successfully kind of shown that with the changes that have been happening. Talking about adding fun, because especially those big highlight changes, like you've been saying, things like resurrect and whatnot. It sure, that is fun. Like you are definitely adding fun to the equation with what's happening with those major talent adjustments.
So in recent memory, you had the Maev change where we were sort of simplifying a later talent, but then we reverted, which was very exciting because I'm glad something got experimented upon. But I'm curious, are there heroes with low pick rates you feel like can just be made easier to play, and suddenly there's a new hero for every level of the game?
Ooh, that's a tricky question. The answer is sometimes. And the way that I would think about this is, so when you have a low play rate hero or a really niche hero, and this isn't just in heroes, but in any game, there's the community that follows that hero is usually going to be relatively niche and really passionate about that character, right? Because just to play a character that's played less, that means that you probably have a really good emotional attachment to them or to how they play, because it's really, really unique. And every game tries to push boundaries like this, at least PvP games, like fighting games and MOBAs. They try to create like a really strong fantasy, right? And so when you take these niche heroes and try to make them mainstream, you have to do it in a way that keeps that fantasy. Otherwise, you're going to make those players really upset. And it's a very fine line to do that properly. I can give you an example of one where I think we were successful, and this was one of my reworks I did. It was Chen. One of his big goals when I went into the rework was to address some counterplay issues, and I thought he was a good candidate for a hero that isn't very commonly picked right now, but could be. And I think that it worked really well in that regard, because we made a lot of counterplay in how his kit works, and we also added a lot of depth in how his abilities relate to each other. So there's a lot of stuff you can kind of dig your teeth into. But we didn't take away the stuff that makes him fun at a base level, right? He can still wandering keg you around and mess you up. We've added some more interactions with Storm Earth Fire and Stagger, for example. Like we gave some new toys that are really powerful that you could play with. But he still, flips behind you, slows you, breathes fire on you, whacks you a little bit, drinks brew, and then runs away laughing. Like that's kind of what he does.
And I remember that release. It was polarizing, as you said, but in the end, you did create something that is now part of the rock, paper, scissors, but there's 20 other elements draft process. He is a solo lane choice, and that's really cool. Are there any heroes you feel like didn't hit that mark just from a community standpoint, or is there a way that the community could communicate better to you when they're writing those statements?
Let me think. Probably the one in the last year that's gotten the most negative sentiment that I can think of is Whitemane's rework. As far as how to communicate better, like what you want, I would say it's a lot of kind of what I praised you guys for, which is keep the criticism constructive. You know, just saying, I hate the new thing and it's awful and, you know, there's nothing about that's redeeming. It doesn't really help us understand, well, what were the key things that you really liked that you want to translate, you know, that you want to be kept, for example. And sometimes people can get attached to things that are just really not what we expect at all. I think one of the ones I can remember was Johanna's rework. People were really attached to laws of hope and health regen. And that just blew my mind what had happened, because that was not what, from the design standpoint, that wasn't what we made the hero to be, this health regen machine. You know, Unstoppable was what made her special. Blinds makes her special. Being a solid frontline makes her special, but not regenerating health over time. And so that was one, like, sometimes you can never predict what the community is going to attach to. And then when that happens, we have to make the decision, like, is this the fantasy that we want? Is this the road we want to go down? And sometimes, yes, we can flex back, and sometimes no, like, this is really what we want the hero's role to be.
So what I'm hearing is that, how easy is that to make? Like, so, I mean, first of all, in Johanna, like, hold your ground. Well, we don't know about the speed, but then we found out about fanaticism, and you get to zoom around like a bit of a jackass for a bit. It's a blast. So that kind of stack worked out, and we all sort of embraced the new Johanna. How easy is it to say, if you woke up tomorrow and you wanted to give Zeratul Unstoppable, like, when the community wants to suggest things, how deep can we go? What sort of things are easy for the team to do, and what things are hard?
Changing, how do I put it? It helps a lot when you can come at it from the point of view that we have, which is usually very high level. Like, a lot of times feedback will be, you know, I want this hero to have this mechanic, it'd be really cool, blah, 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 but then there's no consideration for how it feels to play against, for example, right? That's a more basic example. So considering, like, you know, high level, low level, how to play as, how to play against is always very useful. I would say very large changes that require a lot of art and a lot of, you know, other stuff that has to warp around your new idea. It has a less of a chance, just because that requires more work from other departments and other people. And, you know, reworks that take art they do take longer, because we have to put in a lot more stuff into them. Whereas something that doesn't, you know, I can just make those changes on my own, make sure they play well, and then we can ship it. But we do have, you know, that standard bar that we want to hit for things to be good, right? But yeah, the more constructive and the more well thought out the idea, the better chance it has to make it. So we do read them, and again, I have that little notepad of things that I want to change, and a lot of changes have come from that. I just look at Reddit and forums, like, you know, I agree with that. That's a good idea, and then it happens in the next balance patch or two.
Awesome. I think I'm going to start thinking about how much fun it adds or takes away when we start suggesting how to tweak things.
That is a big thing. Actually, I think I because I sent you guys some answers to the questions that you had, and one of those was this concept of the salt wall. And this is a term that actually one of our designers coined when we were designing Alarak. The salt wall. So let me explain, you'll understand. So imagine that when you're making a new hero or a rework or whatever, right? You've got this wall, and when you hit this wall, you've gone too far. This is the salt wall, right? Now you're over here when you start, and as you add mechanics that are frustrating, you get closer to the salt wall. So as an example, you're here, you add CC, hard CC, a little bit closer. You add mobility, a little bit closer. You add a really strong split pushing potential. Now you've hit the wall. All right, because imagine a high mobility split pushing hero that also has CC. Probably not going to be really fun to play against. And so internally, we actually think about this a lot of, like, you'll kind of know as a barometer when you're one of the designers and you're making a new thing, because when you hit the wall, you suddenly get overwhelmingly negative feedback about your design. Of, oh my gosh, how could we design? Oh my gosh, how could this happen? This guy's flipping me into my team and stunning me and taunting me. I'm not calling out any specific heroes, by the way.
No, I couldn't think of one that could do such a thing.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I can't think of an orc that has done that to me many times.
But I remember back in Alarak's design, we actually ran into this because he used to imagine this. He's a really mean hero, right? He pulls you and he silences you.
And then he insults your mother in the process.
Yes, he does. I love that, by the way. He was a lot meaner internally than what we shipped with.
Oh, really?
As an example, one of his heroics, I forget what we named it. Arthas actually had this back in like the Blizzard Dota days. But imagine he had a short range point click and he just grabs the enemy hero and just chokes them, stunning them for like 2 seconds and sucking like, 30% of their life.
Oh, wild.
It was thematically amazing.
Now, good word choices are the same. I like it. Yeah, fanatic.
Yeah, right. And it didn't end up making it in. Arthas actually originally had it. We tried it once a long time ago. We really liked this idea. It was called Wrath of the Lich King, the most amazing name. But he would grab somebody and just hold them up and just drain their life as a tank. And it was my favorite heroic. But then we made Cinder Ghosts, and I was like, okay, I guess.
We'll trade force choking for an undead dragon that freezes the battle.
Yeah.
I would make that trade too. As a raging Arthas fanboy, I would go for the undead dragon.
But that idea of like where that wall is, though, can be hard to determine, right? Like when we released Garrosh, we knew he was kind of close, but when it came to the community, it was like over here. And so, a little while later, we had to redesign his Q to be a stun and a slow instead of just pulling you to him instantly. And adding that counterplay was really important to making it feel better to play against.
Are you just too nice to each other internally? Were people not like abusing that? the pull?
No, there were people upset. There still are. I think I can say this, but even internally, we oftentimes ban Garrosh from our playtests for a while because it can hit that salt wall.
Makes sense.
But the thing is that like philosophically you think, oh, if they can't handle it, then why is he live? But with these kinds of things internally, you got to think about like we have a very wide skill range of people that play. And there are some heroes like Garrosh where if you are significantly better than the other team, then you're just throwing people all day into your towns, and we're not actually getting the testing done of the mechanics that we want to test. All that we're seeing is, oh, this GM Garrosh knows how to throw people into his team. Whoop-de-doo. So we have to make those calls sometimes.
As to making those calls, you're making me think. Like I'm wondering, is there like a balancing act where, or like I don't know, how much does it enter your mind when using Garrosh as an example? Like, I don't know, trusting the community, like the player base to eventually just kind of learn how to counter that through gameplay versus when, like, is that the salt wall? Is that the point where you're like, oh no, we need to protect them from this. We've gone too far. Or like, is that too, I don't know, ephemeral?
Yeah, no, it's fine. Like a lot of like real design and high level thinking is about this kind of stuff, right? And a lot of these things, there's not one single right answer, right? And this one is kind of a gauge. You have to look at the community feedback. You have to go in game and play yourself. Like I played this internally a million times and felt okay. Now I'm playing it in Storm League. Is it actually crazy? Is it actually out of hand? And that's where I mix my own personal experience and why I try to play the game a lot too, so that I can relate to these things that the community plays about or complains about sometimes, right? Like there's oftentimes a lot of validity to it. And if there's something that we can do to solve it, then we're going to explore that.
Yeah. So like I guess let's take the old pull on Garrosh's Q and pit it up against living bombs on Kael'thas. Like where there's clearly a line between those two where people, annoyed by the spreading of living bombs are still having to deal with that, and those of us who lived through Garrosh's launch, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Like, how do you decide on what gets to stay and then what does need to get, maybe readjusted?
To be perfectly honest, it is kind of a judgment call. but where my thought process is and where the team's thought process is on making those calls is a lot of how much counterplay is involved, and are there resources or ways that the community can learn to play around it. For Kel'Thas specifically, and this is just my own personal opinion, this may change someday, but that's kind of where I draw the line of like, he's like a final boss if you're someone that's learning to play the game and need to cross into the echelons of the higher level players, is that you need to learn to play around this mechanic and around dodging your teammates. Because the onus is on the enemy team to dodge that kind of thing, I'm a lot more okay with it existing than, whereas Garrosh, there's a lot of times where he can be on a mount coming at you from a bush or things like that. Or before, when it just pulled, it was a lot harder to deal with. There wasn't a window of time that you could do something. Even right now, Garrosh can kind of take away that window by coming at you from a bush, right? But in the normal 90% of scenarios, he cues you, tries to walk up to you. You can use an escape ability. You can push him away. You have a lot of responses. And with Living Bomb, you have a window of time every single time where you have a chance to dodge. I remember when we worked on Kel'Thas, Living Bomb was a constant thing that we were talking about and debating of like, how should this work? What should we do? Interesting enough, I remember there was a lot of people internally. If you remember when he first had Living Bomb, he could instantly cast it twice on you and blow it up right away.
Oh, I abused
it
like crazy.
When he was one of the first reworks that I did, actually, and I remember that was one of my high level goals right away when doing that rework was there has to be a window of time for counterplay. And I was asked at some point, like, well, why don't we just make it a talent? And I was like, no, it has to be counterplay. There has to be a window. If there's always a window, then it's justifiable. If you can take it away, then not so much, right?
That's fascinating.
That's cool. Yeah, we've certainly seen that over time. I mean, even someone that is currently under maybe the salt wall scope is Kira, but getting that information to the community that, oh, you sidestep. Like, the counter is to stand slightly sideways when she casts anything, and you dodge it. Or Butcher, probably one of these boss heroes as well, where the strategy is, well, hide in a bush until he chooses a target, and it's over. But making that communication is very difficult.
It can be. It's a little... how to say, spooky on our side, because we don't want to tell people how to play the game all the time. We don't want to go there and be like, this is how you should do everything in these situations. Because one, we might be wrong sometimes. Like, there have been times where a hero actually doesn't play the way that we thought it would. Alarak is an interesting example of that. I think internally, we weren't really using the scoop people in with W and Q combo. That is like the standard way that he plays. I remember I was doing that like really close to live a little bit, but most of the time we were using his Q as like an anti-melee thing. Like, you're fighting Thrall in lane and you Q them and you use your W to push them into your other, like your tank CC or to an immortal CC or these other things. It's a positioning tool, but he ended up becoming a combo mage in many ways. So we don't want to be too presumptuous of how to tell people to play. And also I think there's a lot of discovery and fun. Like, the magic of games is to come to your own conclusion of how these things work and to try and experiment and find these things that you think nobody else has discovered yet.
Are there do you have an example of a time where, other than Alarak, where the direction of the players took a hero and how to play them completely upset your expectations?
Oh man. Alarak was one. This is more specific because I can't think of too many off the top of my head, but Garrosh, we always thought that the play was Q then E. And especially now, a lot of the play is E and then Q behind you to get the stun and then walk up and taunt or something. We didn't expect that to become as prevalent as it was.
That makes sense.
What about the salt wall in the other direction? And people often call these trap talents, noob talents. You just brought up that having your own agency is very important. And that game you won with full auto attack Vala felt amazing because you made that choice. Mm-hmm. Is there anything lingering in the game right now that you feel needs to be removed, or are all these healthy choices? So,
interesting, I guess, thought on that. as far as how trap talents are concerned, if you look at the entire game and like talent win rates specifically, they're all really good, like really competitive with each other purely from a win rate perspective. Right now, that doesn't mean that they're always perfectly viable, but as far as like how well talents are performing, it's very rare that there's one that's really far behind the others on a tier. And usually if there is, we fix it really quickly because it's very obvious. A lot of these trap talents that you talk about, whenever I see those types of posts or see those types of opinions, I go and check the data and make sure that, there's something, what's the truth there? What's actually going on? To give you an example, one of the talents that I've seen people talk about that's a trap talent is Phoenix's Q talent, the circle one. And at level 1, I think it's Arsenal Synergy. But I actually went in and looked at the data to kind of show you guys how we see things from our point of view. Let me see if I've got it here. So if you guys can take a look, these are his level 1 pick and win rates for Phoenix.
Oh, nice. Graph
let me
action.
See. Yeah.
They're pretty close.
Oh, no. There we go.
So win rate is on the right and pick is on the left?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I labeled it.
Gotcha.
But if you can see there, like people can clip and stuff. But when I see these things, I go in and look, and actually Phoenix's level 1 talents are almost the same win rate across the board. And then their pick rates, you actually have the highest skill talent, the one where you do 3 regular shots and then the big shot that does more damage, is actually winning by a tiny bit more, which is actually almost perfect, right? The high skill talent's winning by a little bit more, and the other 2 talents are both evenly picked and competitive. When I see that, I'm like, wow, this is actually really good. But then, you have these opinions that, oh, this is a trap talent. It's actually not good. I don't want this person to pick it in my games. And that can be really tricky to design around, because a lot of our design actually doesn't come down to perfect numbers. Human psychology is a huge deal when it comes to making a good and fun game. And that's something that we do have to take into account constantly.
That is a trend, or like that's I guess a philosophy I hear a lot across like all Blizzard games. Because this is the only show I do about Blizzard games. I've talked to a lot of devs from Hearthstone, for example, and that's come up many times over there as well. Which is like,
that's interesting. Yep.
Feeling is important to some degree,
and not just a little important. It's really important. Like, it's almost hard to understate. Like, a very, very well balanced game that isn't fun and doesn't feel fun isn't going to be successful at all. Right? I can very easily make every hero's win rate like right next to 50% just by adjusting health. I can do it. It's not going to make a fun game, but I can do it. And understanding that difference of making sure that the fun is preserved when we make changes is actually really, really important to us as a team and to me personally.
Yeah, to me, it's such a standout of like what makes like asynchronously balanced games so interesting. It's like it comes from that that asynchronousness. I don't know what that word is. I'm trying to find there, but yeah, it's like I think StarCraft is the first game I ever played where I kind of noticed that. I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, right. It makes it interesting. That's important.
Yeah. So that's I always find it fascinating when the feeling of the game gets brought up when we get to talk to developers, because I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And a lot of people do think that like balance is just, oh, there's an algorithm and you can make these win rates as close as possible, and that's a good balanced game. And I actually push back a lot against that. It's not just about making win rates close. It's about changing your heroes or champions or characters or whatever it is to feel like they're balanced. And that to me is just as important as whether or not they actually are. You want both, of course, but the feel is very important. Because it doesn't matter if 2 heroes are really, really close in win rate if nobody actually thinks that and they're all, 100% banning one hero and not another.
I feel like we've reached that with Diablo now. Like the reward for properly drafting Diablo is phenomenal, but first picking Diablo is a terrible mistake in higher league. As you guys start to like think about, maybe one of the big community requests more tanks, how does that philosophy go into it?
Do you mean like making tanks fun or feel good, or I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
Right. Like how do you take what is a stunning lane clearing the salt wall machine and make it functional for your future thoughts with this video game?
Okay. I'm going to go a little more high level here. Okay.
Cool. Bring it.
So this is true not just in games, but it's kind of a life thing. So I'm going to go into real life first, and then we're going to relate it back to heroes into games, okay?
I like it.
So if you're a parent, right, and you're raising a child, you have two conflicting things that most parents can relate to, which is I want to keep my child safe and I want my child to have independence, right? And especially when they're young, you're always fighting these two things of I need to keep them safe because if I don't, they're going to run out into the street and something bad's going to happen, or they're going to, drink something they're not supposed to or whatever. And at the other side, you want them to feel you want them to grow up into a functional adult. And so they need to have experiences where they fail and they take risks and do things like that, right? And there are these two competing ideas that you have to reconcile. In design, this happens all the time. Like, this isn't just like a little part of design. This is almost all of design, where you have two conflicting or seemingly conflicting things, and you're trying to find a way to make both of them work. And clever designers and good designers are the ones that can do that and walk that line really well. I can give you guys a million examples of this now to relate back to heroes, right? So as an example, as an artist, you want hero abilities that you create and effects to pop and be very visually awesome and cool and hit the fantasy of the hero. From a gameplay perspective, we need our game to be readable, which means that when 10 heroes are using these crazy spells that you're developing, it's not a flash of color and no one can tell what's going on, right? You're fighting these two things, and it's a real thing that we think about and design around. Another one that I can think of, and I'm going to ask you guys a question now and put you in the designer's shoes, right? So let's say that you're making a game, you're the designer, and you have two goals for your game. You want your game to appeal to a very wide audience. So you want a lot of people to be able to jump in and play your game, right? This is kind of a base goal that a lot of games have. On the other side, you want your game to have a lot of depth and for people to play this game for 10 years, because that's what Blizzard games tend to do. How do you make these two things happen? A game that people can play for 10 years or longer, but also anyone can jump into and is super easy to get into.
I'm trying to think of this without like heroes just in the back seat, just because like I think of heroes and I go, wow, you just have a roster of ways to play that are varying levels of difficulty to pilot.
Nope, this has to be game agnostic. This is a developer philosophy, right? You need to make a game appeals to most everyone, but they can play for 20 years on. See, these are what we think about all the time. I'll give you our answer. It's one of Blizzard's core mantras with design. Easy to learn, hard to master. That is why that is one of our core tenets when we design things, is we design things that on the surface, and this is where I talked about why I took away your precious Arthas Deathglow range. Easy to learn is one of those pillars of anyone can jump in and at least have an idea of what's going on. When you add depth of hard to master, it's not necessarily in complexity, which is where probably a lot of your minds were thinking, like, how do we reconcile this? Because my game has to be super complex and then it's not easy anymore. But hard to master doesn't mean that it's lacking depth, right? It just means that you have interesting interactions.
Right. I mean, there's so many different ways that I think you could kind of dive into. Well, or answer the question is, how is heroes hard to master? Because there's different answers, right? Like
there are a lot of them, right? Mastering macro, mastering hero interactions, mastering draft. There's a lot of things that there is there, but just selecting a hero and picking it and playing is super easy, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you guys another one if you want.
Yeah, bring it.
Hit me.
All right, here's another one. All right, you're thinking of two conflicting things. You want your hero to feel and be very powerful, right? You're making Kel'Thas or Arthas or whatever. So the player needs to feel like a badass when they're playing this hero and like they can just dominate. And there are situations where they should be able to. People shouldn't get too mad and hit that salt wall when they play against your hero. No salt wall. Really powerful, crazy, feels good to play as.
I don't think you realize how much we're going to abuse the term salt wall after today's episode.
you have gifted us.
I believe it.
Yeah,
I love
totally
this.
Gifted us here. Yeah.
All right, this is another one.
That makes a ton of sense. And I would have to imagine it's quite the challenge getting to bring these characters to life in a MOBA setting. Like, yeah.
This is the world that we live in. We have a million of these, by the way. This is just 2 little examples.
Yeah.
I can give you our answer or my answer. It's just 1 word. 2 maybe. Counterplay.
Counterplay. Okay. That makes sense.
If a hero feels fair to play against, the salt wall palpability goes way down because you know that you could have done something about it, right? If you have a hero, and that's where, like the Garrosh Q change, for example, the goal there was to add counterplay. That window of time between him hitting you and him actually getting to you and throwing you, there is a window where you can do something. The same thing when we changed Chen. This was a little divisive at the time, and we lowered the window. But one of my big counterplay goals there was after he flips over you, there's a window of time between him hitting you with the keg smash and breathing the fire that you can do something. You can stun him, you can vault away, you can try and juke the fire. There's a lot of opportunities to do something. And as a reward for him, we put a lot of more power into that combo. When he hits the combo, it's actually doing real damage now. So counterplay lets you add power without it feeling too terrible to play against, as long as you don't go too far, right? But,
there's obviously like a ceiling to that, right? Where it's like, well, there's
a
all the
ceiling.
time in the world to
Absolutely
counter this, but it just does like so much damage in a single blast that you're just murdering whoever you're trying to play against.
Are there any nubs, levers and things you turn that we don't think about at home? Because something that's always come to mind is, well, why do people have to stop? Like Dahaka's tongue, if he could do that in motion, would be amazing. But I know that animation, Arthas stopping to cast Death Coil, is what's holding it back in a way.
Yes. And that is, well, I'm not going to say always, but most of the time it's very, very intentional. And it's part of that counterplay aspect, but also not always, but it's also part of the hero feeling different from other heroes. So as an example, so I'm going to give you 2 words that one is negative and one is positively connotative, and I'm describing the same hero. Clunky, deliberate. Right?
I got a hero for you that goes into that directly. Anduin,
okay, which one?
Me. The clunk on Anduin made him World of Warcraft.
Oh, that's interesting. I was actually thinking of Leoric.
I love that guy.
I know. Well, again, you see, because you think of deliberate, and that was what we were going for. Our fantasy with him was very powerful hits, very deliberate swings. Even when he casts his W, it's like he stops and does it, right? And that fantasy is what we were going for. And because his art and animations and sounds sell it so well, you don't think of it as clunky, right? But then on another hero, sometimes you think they should be more fluid, and then there are people say like, oh no, that's not deliberate, that just feels bad. And sometimes we do have to make those judgment calls. When we can, we'll, smooth up animations or even take off cast times and things. We've done that before. But it does change how the hero feels, and that does matter a lot, right? If we made Leoric's skeletal swing, like he just swipes and can just walk right away after you, right? It's not going to feel the same. It actually, I think, would feel worse for a lot of players because that impact and that might behind it is a big part of the fantasy of the hero. And like we discussed earlier, fantasy really does matter. It's important.
Could Kyle and I get selfish for a moment and fire off a couple very specific examples that we're curious why they're still clunky or deliberate?
I might not have answers, but I can.
No comment is totally acceptable.
And add it to my note.
No comment is acceptable. So, I mean, Kyle already mentioned
Okay.
one that we've literally been talking about for years, which is Arthas stopping moving when he casts Death Coil.
On Arthas, I actually wasn't on the team when he was made, so I can't answer to that one. Gotcha. I don't know why. I I don't know if it would be the worst thing in the world if we removed it. It could be one of those things of it might have been that back in the day everything had cast times because his W, he pulls his sword and does it. But I'm not sure. I can't answer to that one.
Next one might be actually a tug of war between fun and balance. Kyle, do you know which one I'm going to mention?
Tyrande, are you going for that one?
Oh, I wasn't going Tyrande. That's an interesting one. No, I was going to do waveclear coming back to Calamity.
Oh, Calamity waveclear?
Yeah.
That was very deliberately a design decision. This was in a period of time where we kind of, I think as a team, undervalued how powerful waveclear was. Johanna had Knight takes pawn, Li Ming had Calamity clearing waves. And we found that when clearing waves is that powerful, it makes heroes less unique that can do it. And we wanted it to be a decision, and we kind of wanted to be part of Li Ming's identity that she's not an incredible wave clear. She's about killing heroes. And generally, when we make those kind of pointed heroes that are really pointed that way, we want to embrace that fantasy and not give them a way out. Also, Calamity's already doing a lot of other stuff for her. It lets her use an ability for damage that normally isn't able to. I mean, even now, we struggle with making the other two talents competitive feeling to Calamity, even though as a win rate, they're doing fine. People like Calamity because it feels so good and visceral to teleport on people and kill them and, ping pong 5 kills. It's really satisfying. So we felt it didn't need wave clear on top of that.
Makes sense. Kyle, did you have one? I didn't mean to run away with that.
I mean, I've started to develop your philosophy, so I know where you're coming from now. But, something like Imperius' ult, where he picks him up into heaven, but he can't take him over walls.
That's a very specific one. I remember when we were designing it, it was largely due to bugs, actually. And this is another facet of design that a lot of people don't see, is that the way that things work a lot of times is internally they might work very different, but then we find these really bad bugs that can be caused. And sometimes we have to make these concessions of, we either don't have this ability at all, or we have some small limitation. Another one that we pointed out during Kira's development, if you guys weren't privy to it, her E stunning on the impact and on after she comes in. That first stun on impacts we had played with for a while, and that wasn't there. That wasn't how the ability was designed. But there were some really nasty bugs where basically, so when she hits you with her E, it puts you a set distance away every time, and then she twirls around that point, right? Like this.
Yeah.
So, but what would happen is if Chen is the target here, he flying kicks her. Midway through, she grabs him. He infinitely flying clicks, and they do this. And there was about 20 of those bugs with Kerrigan Ravage and all of these targeted go to a hero type of things. And we had to add that to kind of reconcile those severe bugs. But we felt like the ability was so cool, and that was like her core identity. We didn't want to get rid of that, but we had to make a concession, for example, there. And this happens actually quite a bit. This isn't like too rare, but that's just game development. Like, it can be a lot to make things work.
So a Panda Kira helicopter.
Yes, it was hilarious. I think like Kerrigan or Cassia would almost do it infinitely. Like, they would chase her and she's going in a circle, so it would go like this, like forever. It was nuts. It was pretty hilarious.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So I feel you. So on like Wrath of the Angiris, if he were to carry someone outside the map, Super Smash Bros. Style, if someone was to stand on top of a wall while landing, which side were you on? Like,
yes, these are the questions that we literally have to answer. And if we can't answer all of them, then we've got a big problem, because it's going to happen in games. It's not a matter of if, but when. So it's like, if he takes you over unpalatable terrain, like the middle of Blackheart's Bay in the water, where do they go? If it's in the middle of a wall and they're like perfectly spaced so that they're on opposite sides of the wall, is it okay that that person's separated from him now? Like, there was a lot of those types of situations that would happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Although, Kyle, you haven't helped me by mentioning Smash Brothers, because the idea of you being able to kill yourself but also your target is rather enticing to me.
But yeah, Donkey Kong it, but that's Nintendo's thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. Very fair. Oh, this is wild. Kyle, did we cover the community misconceptions yet, do you think? Or do you think there's still something to dive into there?
I mean, I do think that we've talked a little bit about like how we can better communicate with you guys, things that we are empowered by to understand, like art and, what sort of balance can be made quickly. Is there anything else you'd like the community to know about what you do or how you do it that you feel would give perspective?
Let me think. I think like one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to come onto the show and talk to you guys is kind of to get you into our frame of mind and how we think of things, of how like we have to go at a very high level, and the concept of salt wall and of these conflicting two things and sides that we always have to look at. I think it's very beneficial when the community kind of comes at things, when they give suggestions or feedback from that same kind of place. One of the reasons why I really like your guys' show is you guys keep your feedback constructive, like pretty much all the time. And that makes it a lot more palpable for me to be like, oh, okay, I agree with them on this part or not on this part, and then make these notes here for future changes. One of the things, and this is kind of a cultural thing that kind of worries me, is how negative the discourse can be between developers and community members, and how, a lot of times it can just be very dismissive language of they don't know what they're talking about. They obviously didn't see this thing coming or whatever. And, a lot of times we're just a bunch of nerds that like to play games, and we got the dream job of making them, right? And we're just as passionate as you guys are, and we just want to make the best game possible. I think that just having a more healthy discourse actually helps us make better changes to the game. It helps us make a better game.
I mean, I think I'd like to see more comments wherever, like whether it's Reddit or forums or tweets, for crying out loud, kind of take into account like a larger demographic of the player base.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like, if you want to be constructive with feedback, try to kind of take yourself out of what you're saying a little bit. And, like, for example, the talents that you think are bad, right? Like, look at, do the other talents actually have a situation where they can be useful? Are they just undertuned? Or are they just like, there's 0% chance that no one is picking these? I can tell you, looking at data, most of the time, there's actually a lot of people that are picking those other talents, and they're actually winning with them. Something that might not be good for your demographic, for example, like I play at the GM level, right? There's a lot less things that are viable as often at that level or at the pro level. But that doesn't mean that those talents that aren't picked are bad for the game. It just means that they're not picks for me and at the level that I'm playing at. Even heroes. Like, to give you an example, Kel'Thuzad isn't a hero that you're going to see in pro play or high level play as much, because at that level of play, characters are better about dodging things, and they recognize the threat that you possess. They're going to be trying to deny you a lot more on just not being near you so you can get your stacks. And the way that team fights work out in those games, they're generally a lot shorter, and so you don't have as much time to farm stacks. There's also a lot less deaths as you get to the highest level of play, right? Like, you look at like 5-man pre-maze or really high level play, there are a lot of games that end with less than 10 deaths. And then you get to middle and lower level leagues, and there's 30 deaths on each side sometimes, right? There's a lot more combat, there's a lot longer fights, whereas the higher you get, the more bursty, and everybody's focused on just killing the thing really quick. So those types of heroes are generally not going to work out as well. But if I come into that and just say, I'm a GM player, Kel'Thuzad is just terrible, I can never finish my quests, but he works for 99% of the game, just not for the 1%, then he might be fine as a hero. And it's kind of, as a developer, we have to look at that super high level of, when we get this feedback, is there truth to it? And can we do something? But is it working for the 99%? And then is that okay? And that's where there's a judgment call a lot of times, right? Like, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But coming at your feedback with that perspective helps a lot to make it more constructive.
It's a good answer. That's fascinating to hear about. I had a thought, I lost it. Kyle.
No, it's all good. Let's shift gears a little bit because we're excited. You know, Nexus anomalies are happening. When are you able to tell us when we should be expecting these? Are they an end of the year sort of thing? What's the plan?
No
comments, okay too.
Give anything away? I think we said, and I might not be sure on this, but I think we said when we announced them that we were planning to have them around the season rolls. That was our goal when it first came out. I'm not going to comment on when they're coming now.
Sure.
But that was our goal.
But we're no longer tethered to the end of the year then.
Yeah. This is something I can talk more about, is that kind of the concept of Nexus Anomalies was that we don't want to tether everything around BlizzCon and all of the changes coming around them. We want to be free to do these kind of experimental things throughout the year and be a little bit more loose with how we push these kinds of changes.
Yeah, because
just so you guys know, this isn't like a huge departure from how we've been doing the game thus far. We've always been making pretty big changes and crazy heroes and these things. But this was more of like, this is definitely going to come and you can expect it.
Gotcha. Yeah, because we've talked about it on the show before, and it wasn't anything that like was officially coined by the Heroes team, but like we always talked about like the holiday meta like explosion, because it always seemed like after BlizzCon, right before the holiday break, some major change was made to almost the base level of how we play Heroes of the Storm that would just upset everything we thought we understood about the game, whether it was tower ammo going away, trickle XP, all that kind of stuff. Those always seem to land in December. And then the holiday break would happen. And like even when HTC was going, we were like, we had the drought of like, we can't even look to the pros for guidance because there's nothing happening.
Isn't that a wonderful time when you can't look at someone else to tell you how to play the game? I think it's great personally. But,
yeah. So it's fascinating. We did get a few questions about that. It's like, is that the goal? And it certainly seems like that is the case.
I can say, yeah, that is the case. We're wanting to be able to do these changes when we feel they're ready and not have to wait to pile it all on at once. It also kind of makes it a little more palpable, right? You're not getting a ton of things that are upsetting how you play at the same time. You're getting little bits and pieces, and we're also a little more fluid in how we can react to them.
I think it's an interesting and to me it seems like a natural way for the game to kind of evolve in the way it updates, because we always knew that like we weren't going to be getting a hero a month forever indefinitely. That's impossible to keep that type of momentum. So it seems like to me the natural evolution of Heroes of the Storm's iteration cycle is that okay, now it's time to start looking at like how do we play the game? Can we shake the game up in ways which you've always done through balance and whatnot, but
we have. And I will say, actually, like behind the scenes, besides the end of the year, we try crazy things that a lot of stuff doesn't make it. I'll put it that way. The things that you guys actually see are things that have survived a lot of trial and error. I think this is something like maybe you don't see from your perspective that I obviously see, but we do a lot of crazy stuff under the hood. I can give you guys a couple stories of things that we've tried, just if you're interested.
Oh, yeah, please do.
But
very much so. Yeah, if you'd like to, if you're able to share, please do.
This is way back in the olden days, way long ago. This is kind of how we came up with 2 heroics. So way back in the day, we're trying to find ways to make heroes differentiated and more interesting on the pick process. We actually had every hero were kind of multi-class. So the way it would work is, for example, you could pick Arthas the tank or Arthas the damage dealer. Arthas the tank, then when you picked him, would have more HP. He would have Army of the Dead as his heroic and more attack damage or less attack damage. And then damage Arthas would have a lot more damage, less health, and he would have Summon Sidrigosa. And or example, Zeratul, he had a tank and a damage spec. And the tank spec had this really crazy ability that froze you in time for a little bit because tanks like to control things. And basically every hero had these. And that kind of evolved into how we got 2 heroics per hero. And that was before the talent system came in. We eventually had that granularity of player agency done via talents instead of right when you select the hero. But that was one of the things where our current game was born from an idea that didn't end up working out.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
that would be nuts.
It was an interesting time. There's a million things like this that were an interesting, crazy stuff we tried.
how has the XP change gone for you all then? Like it was ready to box, it went out, and you went a little back and forth on the lane clear last hit kind of business, but for the most part, most heroes have not been changed by this update.
So far, I'd say that we're pretty happy with it. Actually, fairly happy with it. We knew when we pushed it out that there was kind of like a spectrum of how extreme we could go with you have to go and get the XP. And we felt like there was some interesting gameplay things that didn't end up working out, where, you know, we wanted you to always go and get it, right? We always had like in the back of our mind, oh, we could make this last hitting, but we wanted to try this way first. And so we play tested with it and we thought it felt okay. And then we pushed it live and got, you know, you guys know, we got a lot of feedback that, you know, we really want last hitting. Mages are having a tough time. Any squishy backline person's having a tough time. And this was one of those things that like, we felt like there was a little bit of gameplay there, but it wasn't worth the loss of goodwill and how good the game felt to play. And this kind of goes into how I mentioned before. We design around like human psychology and how the game feels just as much as what's actually happening and what is good from a designer point of view. One of my another philosophy that I have that's kind of a little more esoteric that I think you guys will find interesting. Have you guys ever read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
Yes. A long time ago, but yes.
I have not, so this will be interesting.
Okay, so it has a concept there called the emotional bank account. And that book is actually about building trust between people. Whenever you have two people and you want to build trust between each other, the book encapsulates this, like, think of it like a bank account, where when I have a friend or a significant other or whatever, to gain favor or trust with them, I need to make deposits into this bank account. So, for example, like telling a friend a secret you've never told people before, you know, they're going to trust you more, or being there for a friend when they're moving, you know, having a deep connection or a conversation with your partner that, you know, brings you together. These types of things make deposits. And then when you do the opposite, you know, you don't show up for the move or whatever, you're making withdrawals. And this is, you know, in human relations, but you can relate this to design in games also, where whenever we make a change, one of my big goals is to make as many deposits in how fun the game is to play and to try and not make withdrawals unless I have to. Sometimes you have to. And what makes game design a little more complicated is that almost every time you're doing this, you're depositing and withdrawing at the same time, right? Like when we rework a hero, I already know I'm starting on the back foot a little bit. I'm making a withdrawal from people that really love how the hero plays right now in every way and don't want any changes. I'm making a little bit of a withdrawal. So that means my deposit has to be really friggin' good so that they are still happy and it makes the game better as a whole. And so how this relates to like XP globes, for example, is we knew that we were injecting a lot of gameplay and cool stuff, and the visualization of XP is a very large deposit in the game understanding and how visceral it feels to gain XP, which does make the game more fun. But when we first shipped it, we were making too much of a withdrawal, especially from assassin players and things, for how it felt to actually go get the XP. A lot too often, the psychology of your average player was, this feels bad and I don't like having to go and get this. And not often enough were we getting the gameplay of, oh, there's this back and forth fight over this globe and I can deny that person. And this feels really cool to use my zoning abilities in a new way, which is what we were going for. So we went with the middle ground of you have to go get it if you're not there and you don't last hit, and you get gameplay a little bit with last hitting the minions. And now it feels good because I have that visceral experience of killing minions and getting the XP, and we still get all the gains of the visualization of XP. But this is kind of how we think of these things, right? And even this isn't just with anomalies, but with reworks and even balance changes. I've been a lot more focused on making deposits and inserting fun and trying as hard as I can to not make withdrawals of fun where it feels a lot worse to play against, right? And this does lead to some choices that we wouldn't otherwise make, or I would otherwise make when we're doing balance patches, for example. Like, as an example, let's say that Phoenix Arsenal synergy talent thing, right? There's an opinion that the Q talent is not as good as the others, and I should change that to be competitive in some way, right? When I look at that problem, if I was wanting to change it, then if I just change it to a completely different talent, I'm making a pretty big withdrawal because that talent is actually one of the most popular talents. I think it is the most popular that Phoenix players pick. So I'm already making a high risk choice to change that talent at all because people really like it already. So now, is it worth them getting some flack from other people when they pick it versus taking away their favorite talent to play with?
Oh, man.
And this is how we have to think. Because when you take away those toys, even when you don't think it's a toy that very many people play with, people really don't like their favorite toys being taken away, right? Who does?
Sure.
I change Arthas's Death Coil and now it's on podcasts everywhere. Like, what can I do? You know? But
no, that's fair.
How it works, right? It matters. So
if I could challenge this, then deposit or withdraw, we make death timers as an anomaly shorter in the late game.
We tried something like that.
Okay.
We've tried a few things around that actually many times.
That's really, first of all, thank you for
answering.
We tried, like letting us know that. I think that's really rad that you're telling us this.
We tried it not too long ago, a few months ago. We tried a little more spin on it to make it more gamey, but we tried when you kill an enemy hero, every time you kill them, their death timer increases, and they start with a really low death timer.
Oh,
so instead of it being tied only to time, it was personal. So if you played well, you get an extra life or two in the end game, and if you play poorly, you don't get to be in the game as often. We ran into some issues with that, you know, like if both teams didn't die for a long time, you run into like Resurgence of the Storm days where you can't end games because the enemy team just keeps coming back until they die 3 or 4 times and rack up their death timer. We've messed with death timers a lot of times. That's one of the things that we're kind of we love doing.
That's crazy.
So I got another one.
Sure.
A rockin' core. Like the core is just a killing machine. I like Alterac Pass. That guy's rocking.
Yeah, no, that is. I think that idea could work, but my immediate just game designery concern is game times. Particularly in quick matches with no healers. Because with the stronger that a core is, the harder it is, especially when you don't have a healer to keep you up, to actually end games. And we don't want to have 35, 40-minute games where both sides keep going to the other core and they can't end the game. So
yeah.
I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying that's a hurdle. Part of our job is to find these hurdles, and then if we can overcome them all, that's where the stuff that you guys actually get come into the game, right?
Has Alterac Pass influenced you or made you take another look at all the other cores, though, in the way that I don't necessarily want all cores to uproot and start meleeing me, but the armor mechanic there with removing armor from the core for each keep that's down, would that be a way to kind of maybe look at it?
How do I put this? I kind of have mixed feelings on this one. Kind of like, I told you about the parenting thing. Like there are two sides that you kind of have to figure out. One of the things that I'm less jazzed about with Alterac Pass's core mechanic is that armor, and armor in general, is kind of a hidden mechanic that most players don't really appreciate how powerful it is. So most games on Alterac Pass, it's very wrong to try to end the game when you only have one core down. It happens a lot where I know because I was part of designing it, but especially when it first came out, I'd get into a game and we get a keep down and 2 enemy heroes are dead and everyone's core. And we just massively get wiped. It's not even close because that core is twice as strong as people think it is. And that's still kind of true. I mean, we've learned to play around it over time, at least when you get to higher level of play. But it's a little spooky, mostly because of clarity concerns. But those aren't things I think we couldn't overcome, but those are things that we would need to.
Makes sense. What about forts hitting a little harder? Play around with that at all?
We've played. I think we've even tuned forts since the game came out. I could be wrong, but we have gone up and down on them. We do think that it's something that could probably be explored more.
I definitely didn't die to a butcher that decided to fight me under my fort, and I'm feeling a little passionate about it today for a very, very personal reason.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll make a note and we can try and explore it.
Yeah.
It might go the way of Broodlust, but you never know.
Yo, to keep that rocking, man. Make room for Broodlust, please.
This is the only thing I'm going to ask you about if you ever return to the show. So Broodlust, how's that coming along?
How's it going? How's it coming?
Just going to send you a little note on Reddit every day. Just like, Broodlust, keep the dream alive, Jackson. Keep it alive.
I want it to. I'm not saying I don't.
XP has then really landed in just a comfortable spot then where it was a huge deposit into our readability of the game, changed a little bit of how we counterplay, but last hit sort of sheared that up and allowed everyone to at least cover and defend a lane while getting the XP.
Mm-hmm.
The other big one I think that has just been in the community for a really long time is the Sapper Wizard. The wizard who gets in lane, gets in range of the tower, and then turns into a missile and bombs on ahead. Would that deposit withdraw equation work out, or is that countered by your philosophy?
No, I don't think it's countered. It's making things different, and I don't think that people have like super high expectations of the wizard right now, which kind of helps from that withdrawal standpoint. Like the more attached people are to a mechanic, usually like the more prevalent it is, the more of a withdrawal you're going to make when you change it. I don't think there's too many people that are really attached, like the wizard minion attacks this way. So you can make it still drop regen globe, right? That doesn't have to change. So I don't think we have to take it away.
Maybe Kael'thas players, because that's where they throw their bomb to get maximum coverage on their lane.
That's how you tell where to shoot it. Barry doesn't do that until he gets near the fort or keep, so you've got time to... You didn't do it, then it's your own fault at that point, right? Like,
Yeah. I think that might be the only... The Kael'thas mains are the only players, I think, of Heroes of the Storm that are particularly passionate about the wizard minion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah, I find it fascinating. I really like when we do get to talk to devs, and you get to tell us about things you've tried internally that didn't work. And for some reason, I'm always surprised. I don't know the level of freedom you have to speak openly. But this happened at BlizzCon too. I had a chance to sit down with Daybringer and Kyle Dates, and that's when Anomalies. It was this past BlizzCon when Anomalies got announced, and I was just like, oh, are we going to see tower ammo as a feature anomaly? And they're like, oh, we tried that. It didn't work. And I was like, oh, wait, are you allowed to say that?
We try a lot of stuff that you guys... I could give you another one if you want. That was hilarious.
Yep, let us know.
Actually, I'll give you two, because these were a really long time ago. So one of them was... And I want to say we predated Overwatch, so we're going to take credit for this, I think. But way back in the day, this was when it was like Blizzard, I think Blizzard All-Stars. Back when we had a shop, we had the ability to pay to swap your hero into another hero. A large part of the meta for many, many, many months was you start the game as Lane Bully Zagara, then you pay a little bit of gold, swap into Zeratul or Arthas or something for the mid game, and then swap into something else for the late game. And the game was actually played like that for a long time. They thought that there was like a lot of interesting gameplay of like a beginning game hero into a mid game hero, and builds that flowed throughout the game in that way.
That makes a lot of sense that you would land on a strategy like that. Yeah,
it definitely worked out that way. Didn't end up working out. I wasn't on the design team at the time, so I'm not privy to exactly why. I remember, though, I was in a QA team that was helping to play test and give feedback on this kind of stuff, and it was very divisive for a long, long time. A lot of things we do, by the way, that we try are divisive, and finding what works is finding the fun is, the whole part of the job.
So what's more heated, debates on Reddit or debates in the office?
Oh, geez. I'd say different times, different things, depending. One of the quotes that I like to say is, or think about, or say to other people when we get heated is, we play test and we deal with this stuff so that the public doesn't have to. And there's a lot of stuff that we deal with that the public didn't have to. Like, to give you an example, a fun one, I remember when we were doing the Deathwing reveal, Twitch chat, and this is one of the games where I was playing him, and Twitch chat was just filled with, oh my gosh, he does no damage, he looks so weak, LOL, Deathwing, no damage. In BlizzCon, he was about 30% weaker than when he shipped. And at the time that we were doing the filming for it, I had already nerfed him by like 20 to 30% across the board almost.
Oh, wow.
So, and even then he came out as a pretty crazy guy, right? So we played with that for a long time, and we play with all kinds of stuff like that for a long time to get them, you know, where we think they're in a playable place. But another fun story of something that didn't work out. This is another one related to the messing with death of heroes. Way back in the day, when you would kill a hero, they would die and a little tombstone would appear where they were. And
very World of
if
Warcraft.
that someone on your team channeled on this tombstone, they would come back to life. Whoa. So almost every team fight was your teams would clash and fight, a few people would die, and then there's like two people on each side just poking at each other, keeping the other ones off the tombstones until the people that died res and would come back and just keep fighting over the dead people that died into these almost infinite team fights.
As someone
and
who
then we went a step farther, and the tombstones we put in the ability for them to slowly move. So when people died, imagine your teammates are slowly shuffling towards you, and they're pinging, and we pinged and added a little help me symbol over them. So I was like, help me, help me, help me, as they're coming to their heads trying to get on the channel. It was hilarious.
It
was in for a decent amount of time.
You put the Gears of War resurrect mechanic in a MOBA.
We tried it.
That is wild.
We've tried some really wild things, but
yeah, I could. Oh man, as someone who gets very, very tilted by never-ending fights that don't need to continue going on in the game.
This was that.
Oh, that gives me like makes me start to sweat thinking about.
But you can see like how it changed. Like I mean, I can see how your old hero switching turned into modern late game talent. Power spikes.
Yes, and a lot of these things that didn't work end up as how we do. That's kind of one of the things that we really push as a team. I remember when I first got on the team, I had just gotten out of a grueling set of interviews and talked with Dustin Browder, who is our original game director. And I remember asking him, like, you know, what's your philosophy on heroes and how do you feel about it? And I remember he told me, like, and it always stuck with me. He said, like, this game is going to be special because we're not going to be afraid to push the envelope and really try things new, to try things that are new. And he said, like, this team is unique and different. Our whole core philosophy is we're going to not be afraid to innovate. And that kind of has stuck with me for a long time. And it is part of our culture and our philosophy of it's very easy to kind of get complacent and just, you know, only balance numbers and not try and really push the envelope. But to me, at least, like, game design is very much art, and you can create some really beautiful and crazy, interesting experiences if you're willing to take those risks and innovate. And sometimes it doesn't always work out or work out on the first try, but from the things that don't work is where we find the fun of the things that really do work. And that's kind of something that I always am, and as a team, we're always pushing for and thinking about. And sometimes it can be really hard to actually be brave enough to push changes that are really putting yourself out there. But if we don't try, then, you know, how are you going to make things better? And how are you going to make something really that interesting?
I think it would be really easy, especially, you know, as a quick commenter on the internet, to kind of like hear that line from Dustin Browder and be like, oh, that sounds kind of like marketing speak or whatever. But it's like, I do think Heroes has achieved that. Like, you know, I've said it before, like, this isn't just me being like super nice to you, as stoked as I am here on the show. Like I've said this before, like I came to Heroes to be Arthas. I stayed because of the lack of last hitting, because of team leveling, because of no store, because of these things that were institutions in other MOBAs, that the game was happy to kind of move away from. And see what could a MOBA be like without all of these things. And
you can't help but respect that, because I can imagine someone comes into a room that we're making a MOBA and they say, what about no last hitting? And half the room goes, oh, how could you?
Right.
Absolutely. Like, we challenge every one of those, and we do have lots of our arguments about like what's good, what's bad, how does this feel, how does this play, and that's where we get to where we are and where we're going to continue to go, is by kind of just innovating and trying to work on these things.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say is that, like, sometimes the downside, there's two sides to everything, like I talked about. When you innovate really hard, you also have the risk of spectacularly failing or of making something that makes the game significantly worse. It can happen. But we always are willing to iterate and keep going or backtrack when we have to, right? Like an example, just me personally, the Maev change. I really wanted to make that talent more simple, more palpable for more people. It's funny, after I changed it and got a little bit of backlash, the designer of Maev actually messaged me. It was like, yeah, Adam, I'm really sorry for that talent. It's so over designed and whatever. Like, I'm sorry, you gotta go through this to fix it. And I was like, it's fine. And pretty quickly I realized that, I had made way too much of a withdrawal, because Maev players are not necessarily niche, but definitely, not super mainstream. And they actually had a really huge attachment to this talent that I underestimated. And I didn't think that my design was a clear enough win, right? There wasn't enough of a clear deposit to justify that the change should stay, sorry. And so we pulled it out. And that's kind of our philosophy with these anomalies too, is that, like, we'll push it out, we'll see how it goes, we'll try and iterate on it. And if it's like just not working, then we'll pull it out.
Well, this has been an awesome talk. I'm going to thank you again for coming on. I keep wanting to call you Jackson.
Thank you.
I know your name is Adam, but it's always like Blizz AZ Jackson is how I see you on Reddit. I want to keep calling you Jackson.
I have no idea. I don't have a preference.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and sharing your balanced philosophy with us. So, as we wind down now, I know we had you for 90 minutes and we're coming up on it. So that you don't need to literally run away.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? Is Reddit your preferred method of communication?
Reddit and the forums, both. I kind of try and keep it as even as I can between both, because I think it's important for both communities. But that's pretty much the best way right now. I am, every morning when I come in, I play a Storm League game, and then I'm looking at those things for feedback and notes and all those kinds of things. So if you're doing things, especially when they're constructive and just well thought out, it's very likely that I'm reading them and taking notes. So
fantastic. Well, thank you again for your time, and we'll keep the feedback coming for sure.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, awesome.
You guys do good stuff here.
Well, we'll launch into our outro then, unless you literally need to go right now.
No,
cool.
I'm okay.
Rad. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of this episode of Into the Nexus. Folks, if you're supporting us over at patreon.com/ITM, we do want you to know that we very much appreciate it. And if you like the show and you want to support the show, that is the best way to do so. To some of our more recent patrons, we thank you in the order that you signed up, by the way. So if you signed up last week, it's normal if you weren't hearing your name yet, because we only thank 3 people a week. But thank you to Patrick St. Pierre, Ogbar, and Libertine. Thank you for the support, you 3. Other than that, keep the emails coming, everybody. A lot of questions that we weaved in today came from our Discord, came from our email, came from Twitter. itncast@gmail.com is the place to write in. You get access to the Discord by becoming a patron. Also, huge thanks to our producers, Declan H., Cheesebob, Chris Gay, Robert M., and Mike C. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And you can catch us live Thursdays, typically at 3 p.m. Eastern time. I went a little bit late today so we could fit AZ Jackson onto the show. But over at twitch.tv/AMoveTV. Kyle, when you're not doing this podcast, where can folks find you?
You can find me over at twitch.tv/Kyle Fergusson, KyleFergusson.com for everything that I do, including the DM Advice Show, all sorts of Reforged Radio. Check it out. I want to use my moment at the end of the show here, though, to just thank you again, Jackson. I feel extremely lucky to have you working on the game we love, man. I really appreciate it, and your passion on today's show, and your vigilance No less. I almost feel like, are you aware of X? It's just a bad question to ask because you're already aware. You're probably working on it, and I just feel so damn lucky to have you on the game I love. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys. It was great to be on.
Yeah. And folks, I'm on Twitter at Garrett Art. You can ask me questions on there. Get in touch with me there. All the podcasts, this one included. It's amove.tv. Go check it out. This week I'll promote the Hearthstone show, The Angry Chicken. Go listen to that because there's so much Hearthstone stuff happening right now. It makes for good podcasts. So we just put up a brand new 2-hour episode last night. So go give that a listen. Other than that, that brings us to an end of this week's episode of Into the Nexus. We will see you next week, though. But until then, good luck and have fun.
Take care.